The nights in Jerusalem shone with lights that did not come from the sky. They were paid bonfires, lit on profane altars. While foreign gods were celebrated with songs and smoke, a sound cut through the air like a knife, the desperate cries of mothers who had lost their children. The throne of Judah now belonged to a king who would lead the people to the darkest point in their history. He had sacrificed his own son in blood rituals and turned the holy city into a field of impurity. But in the midst of this tragedy, something impossible to imagine would happen. This same cruel king would become the living portrait of divine mercy. How did this happen? How could a man sunk in evil become an example of redemption? Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and comment on which state you are watching this video in. The beginning of this turnaround began tragically. Hezekiah, one of the most righteous kings Judah had ever known, was on the verge of death. At his bedside, young Manasseh, just 12 years old, watched the hope of a nation fade with his father's last breath. When the king died, the pain was not only felt by one son, but by an entire people who watched with fear as their future was handed over to such inexperienced hands. Soon after ascending the throne, Manasseh began to be surrounded by persuasive voices, men who whispered ancient promises and foreign ideas. They spoke of power, dominion, and ancient rituals that could make him even greater than his father. Curious, impressionable, and eager for greatness, the young king listened. While the priests feared for the fate of the nation, Manasseh began his own revolution. His first act as king was a direct break with the past. He rebuilt the pagan places of worship. What Hezekiah had destroyed with such courage was now returning with even greater force. A new court formed around him. Among them, a man from distant lands would become the most influential. Every night new rituals emerged. Strange children roamed the royal halls, and the smoke of impure incense covered the palace windows. Manasseh had tasted something that seduced him, the power of darkness. But there was a silent betrayal underway. That close advisor also served another master, Assyria. In secret meetings, he revealed information about the kingdom's weak points, selling Judah's security for impure alliances. And Manasseh, blinded by his thirst for greatness, did not see the danger approaching. The sacred city, which should have been a reflection of divine glory, was now heading towards the abyss, and the chaos that would follow would be just the beginning. If you believe that not even the worst of sinners is beyond God's reach, leave your like and write in the comments, God still transforms. On a moonless night when the darkness was thicker than ever, something began to move. Jerusalem, shrouded in shadow, barely breathed. It was in this silence that an ancient volcano emerged from the dark corridor of the palace. It was Isaiah. The same prophet who had walked beside Hezekiah now appeared like a ghost from the past. His hair, already white as snow, shone in the torchlight, and his eyes carried the fury of one who had seen too much. "Son of Hezekiah," he said, his voice echoing with unearthly force. "The blood cries from the ground. The Lord will not remain silent forever." Then Manasseh commanded, taken aback, ordered the guards to remove him immediately. But it was too late. The prophet's words had lodged themselves in some deep corner of the king's mind. Later that night, restless, he walked the corridors in silence to the ancient royal library. Rummaging through the ancient scrolls of parchment, he found records of his father's reign, testimonies of answered prayers, miracles, and victories. For a moment his hand hesitated, but he was not alone. Samael, the counselor of darkness, whispered at his side, "Your father was weak. He contented himself with crumbs of power. You were born for much more." In a fit of rage, Manasseh ordered the records hidden in the deepest dungeons. And then the signs began. Shooting stars streaked across the sky like flaming blades. Strange omens spread through the streets. But Isaiah kept appearing here and there, with increasingly direct warnings. But the king hardened his heart. Profane altars multiplied throughout Jerusalem. Smoke from pagan incense rose from every hill. Manasseh became a feared name beyond the borders of Judah. And then came his darkest decision: to hold the Lord's faithful responsible for all the evil that befell the kingdom. "They are to blame," he cried out in a furious council. "They are preventing the new gods from blessing us." The persecution was brutal. Families who refused to bow to the new rituals were driven from their homes. The last priests of the Lord were hunted down. Some disappeared without a trace. Others were thrown into dungeons. But the height of the blasphemy was yet to come. Manasseh ordered a statue of a foreign god to be placed inside the Holy of Holies, a pagan altar in the most sacred place in the Jewish faith. At that moment, the earth shook. Dark clouds covered the sky, but even that did not break the king's spiritual blindness. Jerusalem, the city of promise, was plunged into such deep spiritual darkness that the few remaining believers hid in caves. Their whispers were desperate prayers, mixed with tears, but nothing seemed to stop the advance of darkness. And so, in his eagerness for even more power, Manasseh turned his eyes north, to the empire of Assyria. During a lavish ceremony in the palace gardens, he received the emissaries of the Assyrian king. But they did not bring only military alliances. They brought new rituals, new darkness. The court was divided. A group led by Josiah, a distant relative of the king, began to meet in secret. They knew the kingdom was crumbling, not just because of drought or war, but because the king's spirit had been sold. He has sold not only his soul, Josiah whispered at a meeting in the catacombs, but the heart of our nation. But Manasseh, increasingly paranoid, had already spread eyes and ears throughout the kingdom, and the worst was yet to come. The rumors reached him like distant thunder before a storm, and when Manasseh learned of the conspiracy underway, his reaction was immediate and merciless. In a single night, dozens of nobles were torn from their homes. Some were executed at dawn before the shocked crowd. Others simply disappeared into the depths of the dungeons, as if they had never existed. Josiah, the chief conspirator, narrowly escaped. With a handful of loyal followers, he fled into the desert, taking with him the last hope of resistance. It was during one of his darkest rituals that Manasseh had his first vision. The throne room was shrouded in smoke, and voices murmured forgotten chants in ancient tongues. Exotic incense burned, filling the air with a sickly sweet odor. And then suddenly, a voice rent the silence. Ancient, powerful, terrifying. The king who forsakes his God will be forsaken by his power. In chains he will be led away. In tears he will return. The words seemed to freeze time. Manasseh disguised the impact, but the prophecy struck him like an arrow. From that night on, the nightmares began. Chains, prisons, screams, an anguish that no magic could dispel. Paranoid, he began to see traitors everywhere. Even Samael, his closest advisor, tried to calm him. "These are empty words, my king. With our power, no prophecy can be fulfilled. But destiny does not bow before arrogance." On a stormy night, the winds howled between the palace columns when assassins managed to break through the security. They advanced silently to the royal chambers. And there, in front of the door, they found Samael. Whether out of loyalty or remorse, he did not flee. He faced the invaders and fell, his body pierced by blades. The death of his only true ally pushed Manasseh into an even deeper abyss. Suspicious of everyone, the king ordered the construction of secret tunnels beneath the palace, passages that only he knew about. He began to sleep in different places each night. Guards watched over each entrance, and pagan amulets decorated the walls. His decrees became irrational, his punishments cruel. Anyone who questioned his orders was branded a traitor. The palace, once a symbol of power and order, had become a labyrinth of fear. But the prophecy would not leave him alone. It was like a ghost whispering behind the curtains. The rituals became more intense. The screams that echoed through the early hours of the morning frightened even the soldiers. And without him knowing it, fate was approaching, relentless. And then came the final betrayal. The Assyrians, those he had considered allies, showed their true colors. During a banquet filled with celebration and wine, Assyrian guards appeared out of nowhere with drawn swords. Manasseh, the king of shadows, was captured like a common thief. Bound, he was dragged through the now silent streets of Jerusalem, as the people watched in shock and without pity. His wrists were bound with bronze chains, but what weighed most heavily on him was shame. Taken to Babylon, he was locked in a dark, cold, damp cell. And there, alone, the echoes of the past began to return. Dreams of his father's face, forgotten memories of childhood, prayers muttered on sunny mornings, stories of the God of Abraham. He wept. For the first time in a long time, he wept. The reports coming from Jerusalem were heartbreaking. The city lay in ruins. The temple, desecrated by his own order, was now a place of abandonment. Families destroyed, hope lost. And he knew it was all his fault. It was in this despair that the surprise came. Some of the priests who had escaped appeared. Instead of hatred, they brought comfort. Instead of revenge, they brought forgiveness. And there, in that cell, Manasseh met his true enemy, himself. For the first time, he saw the promises of power for what they really were, empty lies. And so, he began his slow walk back to the light. It was on a starless night, after a harrowing nightmare where he relived one by one the horrors he had caused, that Manasseh finally broke. For the first time in decades, he fell to his knees. His hands, which had once raised idols and signed cruel sentences, now trembled. He prayed, not to the false gods he had so long sought, but to the God of his fathers, the one who had once been worshipped in the temple he himself had desecrated. His prayer was not a cry for deliverance. It was a heart-rending cry of repentance. "Lord," he whispered, his voice choked, "I have sinned like no king before me. The blood of the innocent cries out in the streets, and the temple that was holy I have filled with shadows. I do not deserve forgiveness, but if your mercy still reaches the worst, then look upon me." And the impossible happened. With no political explanation or apparent strategy, Manasseh was freed from captivity in Babylon. His return to Jerusalem was without processions or hymns of victory. He returned as a broken man, but not defeated. His hands were calloused with pain, and in his chest a new flame, that of restoring what he had destroyed. His first order was clear. All the pagan altars he had built would be destroyed, and he himself began the task. He climbed hills, descended valleys, and wielded tools. With each blow of the hammer that disfigured an image, it was as if he were striking the darkness he had once embraced. There was no arrogance in his gestures, only conviction. Each stone removed was a silent plea for forgiveness. Rebuilding the city was a difficult task. People still looked at him with fear or distrust. Many could not believe in his transformation, but he did not give up. With patience and constancy, he began to rebuild not only the walls of the city, but also the walls of the people's faith. He established laws that protected the worship of the true God. He gathered resources to help the families he had hurt with his persecutions. Little by little, Jerusalem began to breathe again, and on Shabbat nights the ancient songs echoed through the streets again, like a sacred breeze that washed away the traces of the dark past. Manasseh never tried to hide his sins. He never denied them. On the contrary, he made sure to be remembered as someone who had made a profound mistake, but who, through grace, found redemption. He no longer saw himself as a king. He saw himself as a servant, and he served until the last day of his life. When he died, there were no military parades nor marble tombs, but he was buried with dignity, as a redeemed man. His story became a living legend among the people of Judah. An uncomfortable reminder to some, but a deeply needed one, that no depth is too deep for God's hand to reach, that no sin is too dark for the light of grace to penetrate. The scars of his reign never completely disappeared. There were still marks. But the story of his redemption continued to be told from generation to generation, as a beacon to those who had lost their way and thought it was too late to turn back. Because it isn't. It never is. Even in the deepest valley of darkness, there is always a way back to the light, if there is true repentance. If this story touched your heart, please like it as an act of gratitude, and comment, "God's forgiveness is greater than all my sins." Do it now, and let heaven know of your decision. Now that you've seen how even the most cruel king in the Bible could be transformed by the power of repentance, prepare yourself for something even more shocking. There is an angel most people have never heard of, a being so dark, so enigmatic, that many say he is more dangerous than even Lucifer. His name is hidden in the scriptures, and his mission is still active in the end times. Click now on the video that is appearing on your screen and discover who this forgotten angel is. and why his arrival may be closer than we imagine.